Good morning, everyone. So, kicking things off, a little bit of biodiversity net gain. A few observations for myself. And what I'd like to start off with is just give a little bit of context where some of these observations have come from. Depending on what day you ask me, is depend on what answer I'll give as to what my job title is. But I have had some experience in the past doing a few other roles. I do apologise in advance if any of this does sound like an in-flight announcement. Unfortunately, old habits do die hard on this. But the farmer background I find very useful because a bulk of my clients are farmers. It's quite handy to be able to swap stories about being headbutted by a flying sheep. It really helps get a little bit of rapport going. More importantly, especially for this one, is I've spent some time as a builder's labourer. And I think it's a very useful role for me to actually get a bit of an idea on what it's like being the guys on the ground with the tools in their hand, thinking about, well, I've come up with this great idea, how's someone going to actually implement it? So this is what I'd like to have a very quick chat through today, and thinking about how we're actually implementing biodiversity net gain in real life. Now, while I'm very much looking forward to listening to the talk about the Heathland Bridge, and I've very much appreciated Katrina's speech on the strategic planning, most of mine tends to be on the small and medium scale. The agricultural sector is going through some landmark changes at the moment. The basic payment scheme is winding down to zero by 2027, and other forms of governmental support aren't necessarily more reliable, especially in the last couple of weeks. If anyone's heard, the sustainable farming incentive has been closed. You've got climate change, you've got the global political landscape, and changing legislation means there's a lot of things that the farming community do need to be aware of, and they're normally looking at these by the end of the working day, so 9, 10 o'clock at night, they'll sit down and start having a head scratch as to what we spend most of our 9 to 5 working through. The country's demanding that the farmers maintain industrial levels of year-round production, but also they need to convert land into environmentally friendly habitat. They need to keep their costs low so they can at least make a teeny bit of profit without impacting the output of the farm, the animal health, and equally importantly, their own well-being. Now, why I think the background matters for all of this is that this biodiversity net gain, the implementation, is going to have a direct impact on their livelihood. They're going to be losing land that they can be farming. But also, we need to think about the other end users, the people that when we walk away from these development schemes, they're going to have the biodiversity schemes in their back gardens. They're going to be handed over a plan to say, just look after that for the next 20, 30 years. So while we do have to focus on the big picture, to leave a site environmentally better than what we found it, we do have to think about the guys with the tools in their hand at the end of it all. So any solution does need to be practical to make sure that it actually gets implemented as it was originally intended. So the first example, when is long-term too long-term? Little dog walking business, not too far from here. They wanted to lease an area of agricultural land to set up a secure dog walking facility. Now, there was an existing postal and stock wire fence around the boundary, and it was proposed to raise the height of that by about 2 foot just to stop the dogs escaping. The local authority were told that it would have an impact on the adjoining ancient woodland, so a 15-metre buffer strip would then be required. Passing these details on to the client, his response was, so we need a fenced-off area to protect the adjoining woodland from a fenced-off area? Okay. Now, having a little chat with both the business owner and the landowner, they both agreed that planting a few extra trees in the buffer zone would be the easiest solution to biodiversity net gain. Not a problem. But when we asked them who would be around in 20 to 30 years to have a little check on it, the 64-year-old landowner said, well, probably going to be dead by then, so best not ask me. The business owner wasn't too sure if the venture would even be around in 30-odd years. So his thoughts were, the banks have only asked me for a 5-year business plan, but we're asking people to commit to decades. The next one, certainly been one of the more entertaining projects I've been involved in recently. It's a new barn for the farmer, a very common project. Half of it was in the existing farmyard, half of it was in an adjoining field with a hedgerow dividing the two. Now, what we originally came up with is that we'd move the hedgerow, so technically we wouldn't lose it. But because there was no more hedgerow on the original site, the local authority said that, well, actually, yeah, that does kind of count that you've lost a little bit, but we'll allow it. So the farmer, who had been working on expanding some existing woodland, said, well, fine, I'll just add some more trees to that, not a problem. A little bit of a chat with the local authority. They were more than happy with that one, but they said that the two habitat types couldn't be mixed. So the area habitat would be replaced by an area of trees, and the linear habitat would have to be replaced by a line of trees, and that they also have to remain distinct, because in years 20 and 30, who's going to come and check and make sure that it's still in place? Now, you may have noticed the last couple of responses to Biodiversity Net Gain have been, well, just plant more trees. Now, it is a very common response that I get, and don't get me wrong, absolutely love walking through the woodland, very happy to see the existing woodlands expanded. But there must be something else that can be equally as well and widely implemented, something that doesn't necessarily require professional input. Now, this is aimed more for those in a position to influence policy creation. Please do remember there's going to be non-ecologists looking at this. Now, don't get me wrong, it'd be great to have an ecology team involved in the outset, but budget reasons are normally the first thing that pop up when you start giving costs for all of this, and especially at the outset when the uncertainty of even getting planning permission is raised, unfortunately someone normally ends up losing out, and at this stage it's the ecology side. But this particular project was a renewal of an expired permission, which meant that the design was already in place and had been previously approved. So I had to come up with a bit of a backward solution to what exactly would work on the site. So, little list there, and what a surprise, plant more trees. Now, one thing I did find quite interesting in all of this, while I'm working through this, is about 170 square metre site, so quite a small one. So use a small size metric. And working our way through it all, putting all the data input, came up with 10.2% net gain, which, yeah, quite happy, finally got it over the line on that one. But just out of idle curiosity, I sat down with a friend of mine who is an ecologist, and we put all the same information into the statutory metric. So same information in, same answer out, not quite, jumped up to 47%. So, yeah, okay, don't get me wrong, it's great having a little bit of clarity, but consistency in the tools that are being made available to us is also really, really useful. Now, I must admit, I was going to say it was several weeks ago, it's perhaps a little bit longer ago than that, but I was lucky enough to go to a same CPD event on habitat mapping. The idea being that I'd get a bit of an understanding on how the ecology teams would approach a site to map it out to come up with the design, and learnt a lot that day. But one of the things that I did find quite interesting is that there are 160 common grass species in the UK. Now, the instructor asked people to put up their hand how many they could name with any degree of confidence. 5, 10, 20. I put my hand down after 5, to be perfectly honest, but there were people still going strong after 20 and 30. But we do have to remember, members of the general public, how many do you think that they might actually be able to name out of all of this? So when you're preparing and handing over these reports, the information needs to be digestible, it needs to be clearly communicated, and bear in mind it's not just ecologists that are going to be looking at this. Now, new habitats and habits do take time to build, so remember, perfection is the enemy of progress in any of this. So one of my main messages of this is that a little bit of patience, a little bit of understanding when you're thinking about this, when you're dealing with us, to come up with any solutions. Now, just as a little bit of a positive note to finish, so you don't think that the private sector is adversarial anyway, farming client of ours turned down a developer's offer in 2015 of over £270 million for a new village. He's very keen on protecting the countryside, and I'd like to say that it is still going strong, that he's been planting a lot of new hedges, new wildlife areas. So we are willing to work with you on this one. You just got to give us a little bit of patience and understanding. So thank you very much for that one. I'd like to give some credit to my eager helper here. He was a very keen audience while I was practicing all of this, and I will leave you in the hands of the next speaker. Thank you.